Hallo, hallo. Hallo?
We tried them before.
Hallo, 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 yeah. Okay, good evening everybody to the second night of coming soon to your screens on Archives, Legacies and New Waves of Sudanese Cinema. Many faces were there last night when we were at Arsenal Kino and showed the old films of Jadala Gubara. Tonight we're here at Savi Contemporary. Elena will maybe say something about Savi Contemporary in a second. And Abi is also around. Just quickly, coming soon to your screens is we are presenting the second edition this year. We started last year. It's a collaboration between the Sudan Film Factory, Studio GAD, the Arsenal Cinema and Savi Contemporary. And the idea was to join in on the conversation or draw up a conversation about cinema culture in Sudan by showing, on the one hand, the old films by Jadala Gubara from the archive of Studio GAD, which has been digitized by the Arsenal Institute, and then at the same time invite the Sudan Film Factory to Berlin to present what's happening now. So the, so to say, new wave of Sudanese cinema that's currently happening in Khartoum.
Yeah, maybe shortly we can say that we're gonna have this discussion now, and then we're gonna have a break. Food will be served for everybody, so that you know. And then after that we're gonna watch 5 short films that Talal brought with you. And we're gonna have a Q&A with Talal and with Shehab that is here and is one of the filmmakers. So yeah, maybe Abi want to say something about the United Screen project, no?
I just wanted to, because before I forget, of course, welcome again our guests from Sudan here. We have Sarah Jadala here and Mai Jadala, her sister. We have Shehab Satti here, filmmaker from Sudan, whose film we will also see. And of course, Talal Afifi and Hadil Osman. We will see them later on stage.
Welcome all. Welcome to Savi Contemporary. We have a beautiful merger of many initiatives right now here, and it comes together as this one particular panel discussion. United Screens, the current exhibition that is running here in Savi Contemporary, is a reflection on the film cultures that are from the global south, and to understand how do they work with each other, how is the, so to speak, initiatives and individuals, how do they organize themselves, how do they make alternative films seen and shown, and how, and this is an exhibition which looks at alternative films that are on the fringes of the mainstream cinema industry, which was actually a reflection on an edit film culture, which is an exhibition that is on the other side of the gallery, which looks at the alternative cinema scene of New York, which in the 1950s, with the film magazine called Film Culture, around the film magazine called Film Culture. And coincidentally or fortunately, we've also have coming soon to your screens, which is the second edition, all falling in at the same time. And we have the great opportunity to have Talal Afifi here with us, and Pia Chakrabarti Wirtwein is going to have a conversation with Talal Afifi as well as Dr. Viola Shafik. Would you like to say a bit about what have you connected for us?
Hello, yeah, okay, great. Yeah, hi, I'm Pia Chakrabarti Wirtwein. I work here at Savi, and basically Abhishek invited me to sort of try to, the United Screens project is sort of an extension and expansion of the Edit Film Culture Festival, and to say, not only is film culture happened or happening in New York and in Western Europe, but it's also happening in places like India. It's also happening in distribution networks from south to south and not always just south to north. And then, you know, thinking through that, in this particular space, we were only able to have the first case study of India. And basically, Abhishek and Camila said, okay, well, we don't want to stop there. Given that we have this platform of edit film culture, we want to have a couple of invocations, as we call them in Savvy, or interventions, discussions that go beyond edit film culture, that go beyond even the United Screens chapter in India, to say, okay, well, what are other film cultures that are existing elsewhere? And in particular, this conversation is about building film cultures. Like, what do you do in places that already had sort of a rich history of film, but that for whatever reason there's a moment of also of new trends, or of new possibility to either rebuild or to rethink the film culture, and, you know, who is doing this. And so we're really happy, and thank you again for joining us, Dr. Viola, Shafik, and Talal, Afifi, for this conversation, where I'll maybe just give you a bit of an outline of the sort of topics that were particularly interesting to me to talk about. The first one is a bit about formation. I'm going to be asking both of them sort of how did they first come into contact with film, and from what vantage points or perspectives, disciplinary and otherwise, are they coming at film. The second sort of topic or idea is distribution and institutions. So both taking from this idea of United Screens of, okay, how are we building south to south distribution networks, so that it's not just, you know, I create my film anywhere and then it always has to be funneled into Western Europe. It always has to be funneled into the Berlinale, or into the International Film Festival in Rotterdam, or to Venice or Cannes or whatever. But no, how can we actually, from within the Global South, be creating networks of distribution and of sharing our films? And then, so that's the first half. And then the second half also relates to that. What sort of institutions are we working with when we're in a south to north relationship? And what sort of institutions are we working with when we start our own institutions? And yeah, and basically what sort of benefits does one have from working with existing institutions, and what sort of freedoms do we have when we begin to make our own? And then the last sort of topic is this one that I mentioned at the beginning, trends, sort of to get a bit of a sense of what, because both of our panels tonight have seen a lot of films and are seeing a lot of interesting new contemporary films, and sort of what kind of different forms of film they're starting to see. So maybe I'll just hand over the mic. I had asked each of you to speak a little bit about where you're coming from first, and then we can get into the conversation. No, Viola, do you mind starting, just because you're right here?
Okay, when you say where I'm coming from, is that something, okay. Do you mean rather, I mean, my biography, or do you mean, shall I focus more really on also on which aspect of my, because I work in different fields, so which one are you more interested in? Curating or filmmaking or writing, or
Of these.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested in how they're fitting together.
Okay, so I'm not the typical Arab here in Codes, because I'm half German, and I was born in Germany, but I lived some time of my childhood in Egypt as well. So I had also a chance to see the Egypt of the 1960s and to understand a bit about the kind of life that people were going through then, and also film culture, of course, at that point. I mean, my first film screenings that I went to were, of course, Mickey Mouse in Egypt as a child. Okay, but then my second entry to film was then later as an adult in Germany, and I got exposed to at the art history, not art history, actually in the, I was studying film. Not film, but I was studying arts, and I got interested in experimental film. That was my first entry. And the first films I made as an amateur were actually Super 8 films that I screened here in Germany on festivals. That was my first interest that I took in film. Okay, then the second step was then because I had a sort of going back to the root movement. So I went back. I went to Egypt and started to study, research film history there, because when I was studying in Hamburg, I did also curate a few series, because I worked also at the Cinemathek there. And one journalist actually asked me there, when I was doing screenings of Egyptian films there, a film series, she asked me, what is so Arab about Arab film? And that was in late 80s. So this was actually a question that made my dissertation, because I wanted to know, what's really so specific or so special about Arab cinema? Is there anything that distinguishes Arab film from other forms of cinema in the world? And particularly also given the fact that Yusuf Shaheen, for example, who is a very known filmmaker, who always said, well, film, there is no difference, film is a universal language. True, but not true in the end also, because in each region you also have your sort of specific gateway or specific doors through which you enter cinema. And in Egypt, what I found out then in my research was, of course, that it did not just copy Hollywood cinema, as it was very often assumed, but a lot of the culture, theater, and even shadow plays, music, what was local and what people used to watch also and see on their stages or in the streets, went into cinema and created like and of course the sound cinema is a very important it's not the invention, but, well, finally, the introduction of sound to cinemas in the late 20s. This was also a chance for many so-called third film cultures to create their own industries, because now you had the big asset of language, local language, and of course also humor. You cannot translate humor. And this was the big chance, actually, music and humor. Same applies to Indian, Mexican, Iranian, Mexican, name them, all the film industries that were created in the late 30s and started to cater either their own countries or regions, like, Indian subcontinent or, okay. So this is, shall we stop here, or do you?
As you wish, if you feel that there's anything more.
Okay, and my own filmmaking, well, this is something that continued in parallel to my research. And then at a later stage, of course, I started also to train other people in the framework of documentary campus, which is interesting later after when Talal has spoken, because it was on the initiative of the Goethe Institute to train people after the revolution in the filmmakers in the field of documentary. Okay, otherwise I did also teach in American University. I taught film and and wrote another book about popular Egyptian cinema, and currently I'm working on revolutionary documentary in the Arab world, and to see, my interest was, did revolutionary cinema start with this current wave of rebellions, or was there a revolutionary cinema earlier than that? And of course we have a revolutionary cinema with a different outlook in the 60s already, but this is another topic. Okay.
So my question is the same. So sort of, how did you first become involved in film? What was your entry point?
Yeah, in my case, it was there were different components which brought me to this place. I was attached to different kind of art. I was in love of photography. My father did photography at house, and I liked to go to exhibitions. And then later, I fell also in love with cinemas and to watching films, which my mother always used to bring to home. And all my entertainment had to do with, mainly to do with visual arts, not with sports. And after that, later, I had also some attachment to literature, and and I worked in politics. And at the end, like, I found that film is bringing all this together. So it was like choosing the nutshell of all this, of art, of politics, of meditation, maybe. And it happened that I felt that filmmaking, and in the context of Sudan, it can be a very good platform for cultural resistance, something which we need very much to have, because in Sudan, all the debate is taking a political form or taking a military, armed form. So I thought maybe cultural resistance can be something that I can do, and I believe in, and more people can be engaged. And this is in general, but what specifically brought me to film was that I met in 1997 a great man called Hussein Sharif. He was a film director living in Cairo, Sudanese film director living in Cairo at the time. And I was there for university, and yeah, when I got to know him, I worked a little bit with him, I assisted him, he teach me a lot, and then I wanted to change my place from in front of the screen to the kitchen of the film. And this was it. Practically, in 2007, I discussed with Goethe Institute that why can't we make like a small hub at Goethe Institute that they incubate a film program, film training program, and after 3 years, they said, okay, this can be happening. And in 2009, we began this project. And the seed of Sudan Film Factory was at Goethe Institute.
Maybe that's actually a good segue to my next question to you both, which is sort of, you've both worked, I mean, in Viola, in your case, whether it's the Berlinale or the documentary campus, which was also founded by Goethe, or founded within Goethe Institute Cairo, no?
It's not, no, founded, no, it's not founded. Okay, so the Documentary Campus is a German association of producers who are actually formed in order to foster and create documentary formats and help producers, you know, to get access to funding, commissioning editors and so on, okay, and access to festivals. And they have a training program that is called Master School, and another training program that is Crossing Borders, which is for Asia. And then after 2011, Goethe Institute Cairo, they got some money, or they asked the foreign, office, the German Foreign Office, for funding, and then they cooperated with the Documentary Campus on creating a formation program for the Arab world, because what they thought is this is a way to help democratization. And this is, of course, the question whether really you can help through these kind of activities. You can really foster democratization. And of course, there is also the idea of the foreign ministries. They always think, that goes very quickly, that you can do a quick change. So if they think they give money today, they think tomorrow they're going to see the film, which is of course not the case. Some of the films that we kind of advised and consulted, just finished last year, from 2011 to now. But okay, it was funded. The Goethe Institute was kind of the mediator of this whole process.
Thank you for the clarification. And yes, the question was going actually on many of the lines that you're starting to sort of pick out, which is basically in both cases. I mean, in the cases of the Sudan Film Factory, it was originally part of the Goethe Institute in Sudan, and then you moved to become an autonomous organization. And then in your case, you worked at the documentary campus from 2011 to 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And so you also left. And so I'm curious, in both of your cases, what your experience was working with this sort of north-south sort of distribution experience.
Maybe in our case in Sudan and in Sudan Film Factory, we were a little bit lucky working with Goethe Institute Khartoum, because we were able to work in the way we wanted and to curate our framework. And all what they did at that time for 3 years was solo funding the film factory, and they were like an incubator structure. And this was something good for us because it gave us a great push. We hadn't to look after the administrative and financial problems. Goethe was doing everything, and we had to do just the training and the film screenings and the networking. So after 3 years, we had the base that we could build on, and it was like a very good agreement that we are going to split from Goethe Institute and still having this kind of partnership. And we always believe that although we have to and we need to collaborate always with foreign organizations due to our due to the nature of our cultural situation and financial situation, but there is always a time where we have to put the seed in its natural soil, or this fish to go out from the aquarium and to go to the river. And this is what happened with us, and we continued the collaboration with Goethe and with different institutions. But we were, I can say that this film department in Goethe Institute was independent, although it was under the license and the roof of Goethe Institute.
Yeah, so maybe you want to speak a little bit about Documentary Campus and what similarities or differences.
Okay, so very quickly, the Goethe Institute is also an association, by the way. It's not a governmental institution. And their policies differ a lot on the ground, which means, I mean, there is this institution, and what they want is, of course, to advertise German culture and, you know, to disseminate language, etc., etc. But on the ground, very often there are a lot of ways of exchange. I mean, and it always depends on who is actually in charge, who is the culture, who is in charge of the cultural department, and. Historically, I mean, since the late 1980s, since I know the Goethe Institute in Cairo, what I saw is that quite often it's handled in a way that is very interactive. That means, you know, they open their gates also for Egyptian films and Egyptian activities to be seen. And this was also particularly important in times when you know, the film club, the cine club in Egypt that was created in the 70s, you know, where the quality of the films deteriorated, they were no longer accessible. And so all these foreign institutions, like also the Goethe Institute or foreign embassies, they opened actually up their, you know, for film screenings. And did a lot to kind of disseminate, you know, art house cinema also, you know, also of small groups, but this was possible. Okay, this is the background. Now, after the revolution in Egypt, the Goethe Institute, there was Günter Hasenkamp, who is very interested in kind of really mobilizing and doing interesting stuff. So what he did is he approached the documentary campus if they wanted to kind of give their expertise in running these workshops. These workshops were for Arab countries. They were not only for Egypt, so even for Sudan, but didn't have one apply at the time. And the training was, like twice a year, and there was a whole period where we followed up with filmmakers, how to develop the projects. This was now. Documentary Campus, as I said, is a German institution, but they have advisors from all over the world, from America, etc., because they want, what their issue is, they want to help documentary filmmakers access the international market, and this is the issue. Okay, that means that what I did as a supervisor then is I made a mixture. I had international advisors and I had Arab advisors, because I thought it's not a question, I'm not here at that moment after 2011 trying, to impose any market ideas of the international markets on filmmakers who are now really very much touched by the situation, and but still, of course, some of the young filmmakers needed training. They need to learn how to access also funding, how to write a synopsis, how also to kind of formulate their idea. So what we did is we did a mixture, and we got some very interesting trainers, for example, from Spain, someone who is, kind of thrilling artist and who is not at all interested in market. But so we had this mixture, and it worked out quite well. And some of the films are quite individual. Others went okay. They got some funding, etc. So I think it worked out in a way. Now it stopped after 3 years because of the funding, because this transformation program by the Foreign Ministry. This is a program that was short, and they want to see immediate results, and we couldn't deliver. So this is going to stop, and the good is, well, they did what they could in order to sustain it. We even tried, I personally tried and to kind of find now with the South. I actually tried to find a partner in local film festivals, like, for example, did one training program really on my own expense with trainers, and Beirut Screen Institute, they gave $500 for each of the trainers, international trainers I brought in, and then we did, this with the market at the Ismailia Film Festival. But at that time, the director was interested, and we could do that. And I was hoping to do that also with Agadir and with other festivals, but actually people were not interested. And this is also now the problem, is that you may have an interesting initiative, but the moment, that Sudan Film Factory was really able to get independent, that's a big achievement. Because the moment when you go out and leave that funding institution and you want to build on partnerships, local partnerships, or regional partnerships, the way I did, I really accessed a lot of people, Jordan, Morocco as well, Tunisia. It was not possible. People were simply, because what they want is they want funding from the north, and in order to get their international trainers, and that's how these workshops work, but not through this kind of cooperation, unfortunately. Or maybe it's also me. I wasn't really successful in launching it further. So we had one session in Ismailia, and that was it. Yeah, so the sustainability is a problem. And this applies also to another project, DocMed, which is a very interesting project that was launched by Beirut DC, which is a Lebanese, very old, since the 90s. It's also something like the Sudan Film Factory or CEMET in Cairo. But and they got also for 3 years money from Euromed, and then it had to stop, and they were training producers, which is a very important issue in, training producers for documentary and not for fiction film. But well, again, they had to stop.
Thank you. Maybe Talal, you could talk a little bit about how you made it happen, how you were able to become independent, because I know when we were talking before, you were mentioning some of the ways that you self-finance through taking sort of smaller video jobs. Maybe you want to speak a little bit about that.
was working hardly on self-financing the film factory, and this was through making a service-oriented department inside the film factory, and this was a department that offers service for other bigger institutions or companies or universities. And through making corporate videos and small documentaries for these institutions, we were able to fund the rental and some little money for our events. In addition to that was this network thing. It is one of our greatest capital in the film factory. So through this network, we were able to get some in-kind fund. We can get flight tickets to have trainers coming to Khartoum. We can get some accommodation somewhere in Khartoum. So it was always doable through this in-kind thing via the network or through this production department inside the film factory. But I believe maybe we are going to face in the future more real problems or more problems because also talking about Sudan Film Factory, I believe the amount of operation we are doing is not really big, really that big, talking about money. So that's why it's till now doable. We are trying now to get more funds maybe and to strengthen the production department, and yeah, this is how it goes till now.
I had a bit of a follow-up question. When you're saying that the network, do you mean that that's a network of other associations in Sudan, or is that the network with the Goethe Institute, or what exactly consists that network?
Yeah, it's a network in Sudan. We have good links with foreign institutes like Goethe, the British Council, French Center. We are in good terms with the Ministry of Culture. We have also a good Arab network and a good African network, and have a network with Europe and some Asian countries. So this different networks we can get. We try always to get the best of them. For example, one of our operations is this Sudan Independent Film Festival. And one of the big expenses, for example, is to get the films which are in the lineup translated from, for example, to French or to English or to Arabic. So through a network called Anhar Network, it's the Arab Human Rights Films Network. The members of this network, they help us in translating the films. The people of Morocco and Tunisia make the French part, and this is a lot of money that we do not need to pay. So now you have a less amount of budget you need to secure. And also through this network, we can extend some screening rights. We can get some guests to Khartoum. And so this is just an example for how we are getting benefit from this different regional and international and local networks.
Yeah, but I mean, my question would be then, how do you personally make a living? I mean, if everything comes as an exchange service, then how do you personally can make a living if you don't, I mean, I assume you are working. What you do sounds like a lot of work. So that means you are actually active all year long in order to organize the festival, in order to organize your training, etc. So how do you personally make a living, and how many people help you for money or without money?
We work in the film factory on daily basis. We work 7 people work in the factory on daily basis, and these people get little money from this production part, from the production department that injects the money to the film factory. Plus this, I'm lucky enough that some people trust me, and I'm consultant for different places, and I get money for this consultations, and this is how I live. And Yeah, my father has a nice house in Khartoum. I live with him. Yeah.
I did not. I'm not an investigator. I was rather kind of try. And what sort of films do you produce? I mean, that's also what. How can you describe them? I'm just curious as a researcher.
We produce, we produce very basic documentaries, and we produce different kinds of documentaries, and also we produce short films and some experimental films. And now we are working in some co-production with a Swiss initiative called the Swiss Initiative. The Swiss initiative for culture, for supporting culture in Sudan, and we are co-producing with them 8 films in the coming 2 years.
So I guess one of my questions sort of coming out of that is that I noticed that for both of you, documentary as a form is very important. And maybe we can switch back to Viola and ask you why documentary, or yeah.
Yeah, well, on a personal level, it's just that I love to listen to people. I love to hear stories, and I love to be silent and listen to people. So that's my first. It's a pleasure for me. And on a second level is that I therefore think that documentary has sometimes the far more exciting stories. And you know, if you would put these stories into fiction, you would not believe them. And so this is why I'm personally very interested in it. But of course, I'm interested, in form as such. So I started as an experimental filmmaker. So for me, documentary is a long kind of struggle. Not on the, I mean, of course, it's also a struggle to survive as a documentary filmmaker, because you don't make any money, that's for sure. So you need always, and this you have to be on that. And I never got, luckily, myself ruined. I never made money, but I never ruined myself. So I was able kind of to walk on this. But the struggle for me is rather form. I mean, what is really a documentary, and when does it start to become a documentary? And how can you translate also stories? For me, one big challenge is actually, sound. I mean, and as I said, I like to listen to stories, but can you make people all the time? I mean, do we want to see all the time people on the screen telling a story? How to deal with that? So that's my personal challenge. Now, documentary for me now as a I worked a lot on fiction film, and fiction film is unfortunately the field where everybody goes to. You know, every interest. They make the headlines. They have, the big spotlights are on, fiction film, the stars, etc. It's connected to glamour, etc. But documentary has very often been in the shadow. And now, as a researcher, I'm more interested in kind of trying to research Arab documentary, because a lot of, unfortunately, of what I saw on the screens in the late 80s and 90s in festivals has now almost disappeared. I mean, I just told you that anecdote before we started. When in October, I tried to do a small retrospective on some of the 70s and 80s film, which is not, or 60s, from the 50s to the 70s, which means this is not even very early, because there are films prior to that. But let's say, I mean, these films are, and I saw them. And I asked them to come I asked the archive in Cairo, for example, to send me the copies to be screened in the film museum, and what I received was DVDs transferred from VHS, transferred from 35 millimeter. And then, you know, and yeah, and they didn't even tell me that it's not possible because they don't have the money actually to recover or to restore or whatever. I don't know where these films are, but these films are made by people who are still living. And the directors of these films are still alive today. And it is as if, you know, these films were made in the Stone Age. And this is a disaster. It's a national disaster because it's a loss of, you know, of what you, of our patrimony, of our, you know, legacy, the legacy of filmmakers. And the problem is that these filmmakers at the time, I mean, they were working for the National Film Center in that case. And of course, they don't have the rights, nor the negatives, nor anything. They don't even have a tool or a means to save their own films. And actually, I have encountered the same in Tunisia, a film from the 1980s, a great film of Tunisian documentary film history. It was screened in the Qatar Film Festival, you know, incomplete, from a old Betacam with lines on it, etc. And the film wasn't even complete. Suddenly the screening stopped and everybody was like, where's the film? Gone. No, and this was the copy they received from television. And who knows where the original is, the 35 millimeter original. And it's a film that is really, it's about, well, very well made film. You know, because at the time actually in the Arab countries, people were very much interested in cinema. I mean, they did, it's not like today, digital, and now we have another discussion where, you know, it's so easy to make you think it's so easy to make a film, okay, you just take you grab your phone and you do something, or your small camera. At that time, it was big, I mean, it was very heavy equipment, and people had to think very well before shooting, because what they had were these 10 minutes at their disposal, or 20 minutes if they wanted to make a 5 minutes film. And then they had to be very careful with that material and save it very well, and it was very expensive, so people had to do a lot more of training before they started. And they actually, some of them, you know, like the Sudanese filmmaker, what was his name, Ibrahim Noor, the one who was in Moscow. Exactly, Sulaiman Ibrahim. Amazing filmmaking, you know, from the 70s. I mean, he studied in Moscow, came back with, you know, with an amazing also professionality, which is actually lost, quite often lost when we look at films of today's filmmakers, and they need these kind of workshops that we offer, these kind of really, and this is actually not a real training. The real training was then, you know, with excellent filmmakers, like, for example, in the Soviet Union, where, you know, you knew what it is to make, you know, to use a picture, to use sound. You knew how to edit, and editing as, you know, kind of the main pillar where a film rests on. Rhythm, all these issues that, you know, we so often disregard today because it's so easy, you know, kind of to, but I think you told me about that there is a kind of problem between your old generation, the old generation of the Sudan film group, and yourself, a sort of, you know, kind of that there is an elephant in the room because maybe they were trained differently than today's filmmaker.
Yeah, it's not between us and the Sudan Film Group specifically. It's to be more clear, it's between different generations, and it's even between me and younger generations. So this is always happening, and I believe the problem is that there is always, in our countries and our cultures, there is a lack of communication. Some of the generations don't we are doing something that they doing, but all, on the other hand, we have some of them who are supportive. And for example, you mentioned Mr. Suleiman Brahim from Sudan Film Group. He collaborated with us in many projects, and he was one of the jury of Sudan Independent Film Festival, which Sudan Film Factory organizes. And talking also on about the other generation, so collaborating with us. So there is something not. I can't say that the understanding between us and the other generations is in the best terms, and we need to cross some bridges to reach each other. But yeah, hopefully this would happen.
I kind of hello, yeah. I kind of wanted to pick up a little bit on both that sort of embodied archives. How do we create those spaces where different generations are interacting, but also a physical archive or an archive of so we have, for example, with Arsenal, we have the Living Archive where they are trying to reach out to various different countries and communities and restore films, etc. But what is happening on the ground, either in Cairo or in Khartoum, in terms of building archives, so that we actually can have these discussions where we're not saying, well, there was this film and it was really great and it was about this and that, but are unable to show them? Are there projects that you know of that are specific, that are working in Cairo and then in Khartoum?
Well, I mean, in general, all over the different so-called Arab countries, there are different stages and different involvements in the archives, depending, because it depends a lot on the governance and the political system, but also education, etc. It's clear in that was most probably but there's like, for example, where there was a political, dictatorship, well, the authoritarian regime, particularly in the 70s, archive. So, but at the same time, they are more organized still until today. And Tunisia, finally last year, they were able to launch an archive, and they got two floors in the National Library with all the necessary technical equipment to store films there. And they are now, of course, lacking means, etc. But this is the first important step. Egypt has actually, a film archive since at least the end of the 60s. I forgot the date when it was actually established. And there is a law that asks every producer to submit, particularly fiction films. You have to submit one film to the archive. But the archive looks horrible. It is technically not at all at any level, and there were activists and people involved. I mean, in restoration, several films have been restored actually, but the number is far too small, and they have been fighting for a proper archive on the that is well organized and that is technically appropriate, but they couldn't. In Lebanon, you have a similar picture. Of course, the civil war destroyed a lot. They were trying to recover some of the films prior to the civil war that started in '73. A few of them, by sort of private as well as ministry initiatives, but it's not easy. And so on. Iraq, of course, another disaster because of the invasion, and the whole archive there was really, I mean, at the hands of the U.S. Was destroyed or at least taken away, and etc. Well, each country has its own story. There are also a number of private initiatives. The one that I know of in Cairo is a small initiative called Sematik, and they are having they are trying to restore the films they find, but they try also to be democratic, that means inclusive, that means when they find a family, a 9mm or 8mm roll in the jumble sale, they also take it and try to restore it as a sort of, visual archive of, also a private, so they also focused on private collections and not only on, what we consider is film history, but on other histories, parallel histories as well. And I think this is something, now we are talking about hegemony and, the issue of who has the power of, to give access to the archive and what is actually kept away from the public and what is not. And of course, a lot of the archives, I mean, in Cairo, for example, now under the new regime, it is like that even the National Library is considered a national secret. So you have to apply, to the secret service in order to get admission to the National Library, which is kind of now, and the same applies to film archives. And so, these are the issues that some of the countries have to deal with.
So yeah, in this case, as we said, its archive exists, but it's not accessible for people in Sudan. We used to have a good archive, but in the 90s there was some mistreatment to this archive. Now there are some restoration attempts, and the ones we can clearly see are the Arsenal's project with Jadal al-Jubara's films, and now with the Sudan Film Group films, with Ibrahim Shaddad's films, Suleiman Ibrahim, Al-Tayyib Mahdi, and also the University of Birmingham is also restoring and digitizing a big number of films. But the archive problem in Sudan is not it is harmful, but it's not this big, because also talking about the history of cinema in Sudan, although the cinema in Sudan is 112 years old, film production in Sudan, but all the films which were produced are not more than 50 films. So, and also most of these films are with the families, so they can be easily, if there are funds or institutions, professional institutions, they can be quickly restored. I wanted quickly to talk also about the documentary thing. In the film factory, or Sudan Film Factory, we are concerned about documentary filmmaking because we wanted to take our place, to tell our narrative to what's going on. We were used to have somebody else telling our story. It can be the government, the news agency, BBC, a foreign director. So Sudanese people need to tell their own story. This is why we were very much concerned with training on documentary filmmaking and producing documentary to tell our own narrative in Sudan.
I mean, you're absolutely right. In the beginning, I mean, in the beginning of each, when you see, look at the history of filmmaking in each country, documentary always is also a sort of important aspect, because particularly ethnographic films, sometimes also these kind of self-ethnographic films, a lot were made in the 70s and 80s by Arab filmmakers who tried, kind of to understand their own countries and so on. But I wanted quickly to ask you something about the Sudan Film Archive, because there was this, unfortunately my memory with names is awful, this young Sudanese who made a film for Al Jazeera about the archive, about the last two, Yeah, exactly, this film about the archive, and the film claims that Sudan actually owns the biggest archive all over Africa, but the archive of newsreel footage. And this is something we always neglect, and this is, I was also pointing out Cinematic as an example. I mean, it's not only about fiction films or important, you know, artists like Ibrahim Shadad, etc. These people who deserve, of course, also their work to be preserved, but actually there is also a visual history. And Sudan, if this is true, you know that they have the biggest newsreel archive from the colonial times. And this is, you know, kind of, and what we saw in the film is, you know, some of the films, they just evaporate, they turn into powder. And that we cannot save these hundreds of reels. This is kind of tragic. This is tragic, and this is also part of the issue. It's not about only no names or, you know, yeah.
Yeah, you are totally right. And when I talked about Birmingham University, this university, they are working for more than 7 years now on this archive, on the newsreel archive, and yeah, and they succeeded to restore more than 70% till now of this archive.
Yeah, so I think that with that, I wanted to actually move into the sort of last section that I had, which is sort of trends or what's happening now. And sort of one of the first questions I had for you, Viola, was a bit about your work with the Berlinale as a delegate. Sort of what sort of things are you seeing? And I also was really struck by you saying that, you know, today's film education isn't what it was in the 70s, especially. I mean, of course, the Moscow, we've also shown films here that came out of that tradition and that specific moment in time. So maybe it's a two-pronged question. First of all, a little bit about your experience as a delegate of the Berlinale. And then second of all, do you have an example of a good film education, or what could a good film education be today? Also taking into consideration the sort of different technologies and ways of accessing films that we have.
Okay. Well, I've been involved. I mean, Berlinale delegate. I'm only delegate since this year. Otherwise, I was in the World Cinema Fund and as a, you know, in the selection committee and in other funding institutions, and also at the Gawi Screenwriters Lab, which is an Arab screenwriters lab that I'm really very fond of, because you can see it right from the beginning, a project developing, and now. The kind of films that I've been seeing since, you know, like the 10, 15 years, of course there is a big change in terms of the techniques applied, etc. But that doesn't mean that there is necessarily a kind of deterioration of you know, artistic quality, because there are always also, what I was talking about is these kind of fly on the wall films that are made now, you know, with this cheap appliances, and this is great that we also have these, and things are put on the internet. That's a whole film culture on its own that, you know, needs its own, you know, on its own right. I'm not, but on the other hand, you have this kind of classical formation, and of course there are also Arab filmmakers who go through this classic formation in film institutes. They go and study abroad, or they study at home. I mean, there are in all Arab countries also film schools, more or less interesting ones, more or less qualified ones, but there are, you know, there's one in Marrakesh, there is one in of course Cairo and Lebanon as a section of the Jesuit university, and there was also the short-lived Jordanian, the Red Sea Institute. So there are attempts also to give a classical formation in all levels, because you actually, if you don't study film properly, you will not succeed also on the international market, because I mean, it's about competition, and if you want to compete, you need also to study the and today it's also a lot about technique. I mean, about, you know, programs that you cameras that you need to understand, etc. It's not just, you know, there is this whole aspect of technical aspect that is very complicated. And now, for example, in the field of fiction, you have increasingly a lot of work is done as animation. You know, a lot in fiction film is now animated in these for digital because everything is getting more and more digital. So now this is a whole new field of technology that you need to acquire and that you need to incorporate in your knowledge. There is one aspect that I recently read a very nice, you know, study on animation films in the Arab world, and I have to tell you that even there it's getting more and more international. Artists, I mean, before, artists from the Arab world had difficulties because they lacked, you know, the money, and these national film institutes didn't offer enough, you know, possibilities for animation, for national animation to be made. Now, because of the technology, a lot of local artists, like Moroccan, Palestinian, I don't know, name them, go abroad, they study, they go and work for international companies, they work internationally for their own home countries, but also in the international field. And there is no longer this, and this is because, you know, now communication is so much easier today, and so you can also, as a professional, travel more easily and get kind of become, you know, part of this international community of professionals, and this applies actually more and more also to Arab artists and professionals. So you have cameramen, you know, I mean, there's Talal who worked with me on a documentary. He studied first, you know, in Lebanon. His first attempts were with Yusri Nasrallah, an Egyptian filmmaker who went there to shoot a film. There he was, you know, just an assistant to an Egyptian, and then now he works for a German company who shoots a film in Mongolia right now. So this is how people and also knowledge travels today. It wasn't that easy before, but now it's changing. Yeah. Of course, we can still discuss, you know, power relations and so on, but at least, you know, there is one positive aspect that I can also speak about. Yeah.
No, maybe if you want to respond a little bit based on your work with the Sudan Film Factory.
Yeah, I have not not a lot to say more than this. But also in Sudan Film Factory, we are still testing the different modules of training and teaching and knowledge delivery. And we are not very sure till now what is the best kind. So we are changing every time the methodology and trying to prove what could be the best for our situation in Khartoum. And as you said, it's also, it has a lot to do with the technical part, and this technical part we get assisted by friends from Egypt and from Syria, from Iraq, and from the US, Germany. They come to Sudan and teach and train on this technical part. And through the network of the film factory, we also try to send the participants to further workshops in Jordania and in Doha Film Institute, even to Egypt, and some of them come here to Germany, to Saarbrücken, to the University of Saarbrücken, and work with Germans. So we try different methods to do this.
I wanted to then just transition to if we have any questions or comments from the audience, either about these particular topics of distribution, working with south to south, or working south to north, working with different types of institutions, these trends, or other topics or questions that you all might have for our speakers. Yeah, maybe if you. Sorry, we don't have a very good traveling mic, but maybe. Perfect.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. My name is Ismail Ali. I'm Sudanese living in Germany. My questions to Talal. I would like to thank that Sudan Film Factory. Since born, they did a lot of work, and I'm following from far. But my observations that the Sudan Film Factory was centralizing in Khartoum, because I felt that is the weird diversity of countries. Sudan is a big country, is diversity. They have a lot of story that to be heard. For example, we have Darfur, Nuba Mountains. We have other regions. I'm wondering why Sudan Film Factory was centralizing in Khartoum, and I didn't see that there's a lot of film from other regions. This is also, maybe I'm mistaken, still if you have something to do, as you have plan or something, but this is my question. Second thing that is also, what is Sudan Film Factory from political scene? Because we are activists from Sudan, we are supporting independent. When you say independent, that is not related to government, but also where we are now as a Sudan Film Factory. Do we have a space for others who against or anti-government that they can be involved? Because I had this discussion last years, because people sometimes they hesitate if Sudan Film Factory related to the government or have a cooperation with the government, and where we are as a young generation, we want to cooperate. This is the two questions, and I hope that is I get answer for that. Thank you so much.
Okay, شكرا يا مي على الأسئلة الخطيرة دي. So yeah, talking about diversity and why is Sudan Film Factory centralized in Khartoum. As you know, Sudan itself is centralized in Khartoum. And we are trying hard to work outside Khartoum. And we made a film about someone called Ahmed Mudir. He's from Nuba Mountain. And we made some films in Al Jazeera with Madani. And we worked in Port Sudan, and we worked also in Al Ubaid. But still, you have to remember that Sudan Film Factory is a very small entity. And we can't easily take this responsibility of bigger institutions and of governmental and of big NGOs institutions. Still, Sudan Film Factory is a very small body, although you believe that it had achieved a lot. Talking about independency, I believe that it's an independent entity, and I fight for that. And I insist that no one has any power or influence to drive the vision of the film factory anywhere. If we can have people from who are against the government in the film factory, our criteria is a little bit different. It's not a political criteria, it's an artistic criteria. We take talented people. If they are not with the government, this is not our problem. But if you need more information, me, myself, and here we have people from the government and from the embassy. I am from the Communist Party from Khartoum and from Sudan, and I am against the government, and I am working, and I am trying to collaborate with the government because I feel this is what the government has to do. And when we collaborate with the ministry, I believe that this is the role that the ministry has to play, and I am one of the roles I feel I have to do, that I have to drag them and to bring them to our field to support it and to work with people on it.
Thanks, Talal. Do we have another question? You're also, yeah. I'm just going to repeat the question for the video. So the question, if I understood it correctly, is what is basically the artist's responsibility and also the institution's responsibility and accountability to a political struggle and to the political realities in Sudan. Is that a good summary? Okay, great.
شكرا برضو يا أحمد على الأسئلة الخطيرة كالعادة. Yeah, and also Sudan Film Factory, what we are trying to do now in Sudan Film Factory, we believe that there are phases for everything, and there are different stages you have to move on to reach your goals, whatever these goals are. And I totally believe in freedom of expression, but now what we need in Sudan, we need the ability to express ourselves. If tomorrow we got the full freedom of expression, people in Sudan, they can't express, they don't have the ability to express themselves. They can't create their speech. So this would make them under the oppression of other different forces, not themselves. So what we make, we empower people in this kind of ability. We train people on camera, on editing, on script writing, on developing stories. This is what we do. And if we are having discussions, we do have discussions. And in this pool of Sudan Film Factory, of training, of networking, and having the film festival and operations, different operations, by nature, a big kind of dialogue is happening, and different kinds of integration, and people knowing each other. And you know that one of the problems in Sudan is that people do not know each other, although of this huge diversity we have, but we don't know each other. So working close together for long times and in different film production groups or volunteering for the festival for months, this make people know the cultures of each other. So this is our very humble contribution in what you are talking about this very intellectual thing and ideological thing. This is what we can do till now. If we would find other opportunities, we would for sure try to fulfill them.
Yeah, Abhishek, you had a question.
My question would be for both of you. The question is, what kind of new spaces do you see where these new films are meeting their new audience, and in what conditions?
Yeah, as Sudan Film Factory is an alternative film school, so we also use alternative ways to exhibit our films. So we exhibit on the roofs of cultural centers, we exhibit in universities. We try also to create or curate new spaces, open spaces for film screening. For example, this year we screened on the Iron Bridge of the Blue Nile. We screened before inside the railway station. So we try to find different ways to have always screening in more and more spaces in Khartoum and outside Khartoum.
Yeah, I realized that also I didn't really reply to your last question properly with the Berlinale and so on, because I think you were hinting at exactly this subject, namely where do these films go the moment they are, and the whole, distribution and also production networks that exist. And the issue, of course, the distribution doesn't exist without the production. And so I was part of the World Cinema Fund, as I told you, and the issue here, it was a very interesting institution in order to exactly actually to scrutinize and think about all these connections. The problem is with festivals and international festivals, the even more like the Berlinale is, of course, that they are international and they are big business as well. So that means, you know, if you have your film there, that's not only for your popularity, but it's also the first entry to sell your film. At the same time, there is also, you know, this whole circuit of festivals that are not A festivals, but B festivals. And for films, this is also a market recently. I mean, it has developed in a market because they are, unlike the big festivals, you can ask for fees when your film runs there. And if you are lucky enough and you made a film like one of the Lebanese filmmakers, the One Man Village, it was, you know, a production that cost $20,000, and they put all, you know, what they had and their work and so on, and they even made some money, but they made it through this, you know, not the A festival circuit, but because the film was very well made, very well edited, and, you know, picture was, and the topic was very interesting. So this was a documentary that traveled, and they made some money and could even produce later on another film through that. So this sometimes happens. Okay, but it's really important to know also these kind of levels, what we are talking about. We have the art house circuit, we have the mainstream, very, you know, high level, expensive a production circuit, and there is also the informal circuit, which is today the internet. I mean, you can, initiatives like Bidayat, for instance, the Syrian Bidayat, they get some funding, you know, really through human rights organizations, etc., and they make films. They training for young Syrian filmmakers either in camps or online in Syria. And what they do is the films are distributed for free. They are accessible. But some of the films actually acquire and achieve a quite, you know, at least, well, interesting level so that you can at least send them to some festivals. Yeah? So, but you have this kind of layering. And then, of course, kamikaze productions. People who just, you know, have $200, they make their film, they put it on the internet, and then it goes off like a small bomb. It happens. So you have, I mean, these are the different circuits. But the moment now, as an Arab filmmaker, because of the restraints at home, because be it, you know, authoritarian governments, or be it, you know, because you have not got the right infrastructure. Now, what do? You try to get money from elsewhere, either at home, you don't have the movie theaters, so what can you do? Your only option is to go abroad. How does this change films? This is now the main question. The World Cinema, for instance, I liked always, you know, the director of the World Cinema Fund saying, oh, well, the more global, the more local, the more global. So these were the kind of films that they wanted to. But the problem is, local, I mean, is that ethnographic? Sulaiman Sisi was complaining in the 70s that, you know, the films that he got financed by France, by that say among others, and the Fonds for Francophonie, etc., that they were made for the anthropology classes in France, his films. This is a danger and a trap that you can fall into. But at the same time, also, there are other filmmakers who did not, you know, who were later on, I mean, even France, this kind of assimilation, that policy that was attempted in the 70s with regards to African filmmakers, this has, you know, stopped. Since, you know, Tahar Sharia, a Tunisian, you know, very important film activist, the founder of the Qatar Film Festival, was also on board there. What they did is they changed that completely, and even in France today you have now a rotating, you know, at the CNC, a rotating jury with people from abroad who also, so there are attempts also here, you know, kind of to counter this danger that films get manipulated into becoming, you know, kind of exotic products that are made for the audiences, and that kind of affirmative with regards to stereotypes. But these films still exist. I mean, you have films from all, I mean, kind of, the strata goes from kind of films that assimilate to films that are really, that use the money but do whatever they want. So you have these possibilities. And again, it depends, as in the case of the documentary campus that I told you, it really depends on the people involved, who is, you know, kind of running the program, what is her background, what is his or her interests, and you can find a lot of differences there, you know, either the paternalistic way, like Tom Tikwa, who goes to Kenya and produces, you know, films that are really, you know, like awfully paternalistic. Or you have the opposite, you know, of people doing some training, and here you go is very, like in West Africa, in Lagos, for example, where you had really an interesting input by the Goethe Institute with interesting films coming out. Well.
Thank you. Did you have any last thing to add then? I think, should we wrap up, or maybe we can take one more question if someone has a burning question? Otherwise, yeah, sure.
I'll just pass you the mic.
Thank you. I would like to hear a bit about, you were talking a lot about funding from different, like especially foreign entities. And maybe you can talk a bit about how you involve big companies like or private people like Osama Dawood and Hajar Group and others who have the means to finance social projects or artistic projects, and how you get them engaged, because I know you do, and maybe like, yeah, would be interesting to hear more about this.
Okay, thanks, Larissa. I don't know if you were here. I talked that one of the ways Sudan Film Factory is sustaining its work is the private sector, working with private sector, and especially in the film festival. The private sector is has the biggest share in supporting the Sudan Independent Film Festival, but they do not fund Sudan Film Factory. They don't fund the film courses. They don't fund any. They just fund the 1 week film festival every year, and it goes through making this proposal, and you will be feasible here and here and here, and this is the way it goes. And sometimes we can get some profit from the festival, so money left, and this money we inject in the factory to make further training courses or other activities.
Did you have anything to add from the?
Yeah, I just wanted just one last comment. When I said the more were radically cinematic, that means how, you know, how does a filmmaker or a project translate their vision, okay, originally, but also, you know, by in a convincing way, and by means really of cinema, of be it, you know, as with references to film history or whatever. So I think this is what we actually need to focus on, is even though, you know, I mean, the medium is now so easily and accessible, but still, I always, when I, you know, recommend a film that I love most, then I say, go back and watch Dziga Vertov, The Man with a Movie Camera from 1929. Whatever you want from cinema is there in this film, be it the music, the rhythm, the imagery, the technique, whatever. And it's true. And yeah, so many people think, you know, they have to think, I mean, particularly the generation conflict, think, you know, you have to invent the wheel anew, but it's not true. If you just go back and look at some of the stuff, it's amazing. It's amazing, and we have a lot to learn from it.
Thank you, and thank you both. I think, well, you have burning question. Man with the
movie camera. Yeah. It's a Russian film, a Russian avant-garde from 1929.
So yes, thank you both, and thank you all. I think we're all hungry, so.